This episode was recorded in early December 2020.
Good morning, Mayberry.
What are we missing that we're accidentally revealing through our behaviors?
Anyway. I was just saying to Yolanda, I was telling Yolanda, I had a goal a few weeks ago. I was like, I bet I could get 300 listeners by the 1 month birthday, which was yesterday, December 8th. And then on the 1st of December, I was looking at the numbers and I was like, well, we just hit that mark. We just hit 300. I wonder if I could get another 100 in a week. And then it was close. Like I had like 35 to go day of, and I was kind of doing these like little boosts with posts and trying to encourage people to send it around. Like, we only have this many to go. We only have this many to go. And it kind of froze with 3 left, and it just hung there for like 3 hours. And I was like, you know what? That's close enough. That's close enough. I'm good. And then at like 11:20, I was like, I'm going to get weird real quick. And I just like did a whole blast on Twitter and the Instagram, and then we got a Facebook page that I have support in getting things up onto. So I got busted out, and it hit exactly 400 at 11:44, and it stayed that way all night. Actually, I went to bed, and it was just
So, playing with that manifestation power, huh?
Yeah, I'm like, can I just casually flex it?
Yeah.
What happens if I try that and make it just kind of a fun thing? Yeah. Cool.
Yes, and trusting in that, right?
Yeah,
Trust.
That critical piece.
Yeah, it's got to be. The trust part is so funny because sometimes you'll think you're trusting and then you're not.
Oh yeah.
Then
you start sifting through it, going, "Oh shit, I've got a whole bunch of blocks here." Okay. Or that being visible thing. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, let's do some introductions now because we got 3 voices on here and everybody knows me.
Hi.
Eugene.
Howdy.
Lantern. What do we call you today?
Eugene's fine.
Eugene's fine. Is Lantern fine? I love calling
Lantern's fine too. Like, I'm cool with people throwing their shit on me that they want to because they're going to do it anyways.
Oh, that's a solid answer. Good times. Great.
You're gonna be flexible, huh?
Mm-hmm. Isn't that what you were describing the other day? Shift your calculus of the projection to projection to masking ratio.
Oh yeah. When you
already talked about that in another episode, didn't you?
I will talk about that all the time, though. These people need to hear about it.
I don't want to like.
No, yeah, we won't. We will not. We are going to get, because Yolanda's important. Yolanda's the feature. Yeah. Yolanda is like, we're here for Yolanda today, so we're gonna spend plenty of time on that. But yeah, no, the masking to projection thing is it's something that people need to be thinking about all the time. So we can definitely start off with it, because I ended the last time after a real long conversation on when you're masking, it leaves all this space for its negative space to be projected upon, and then people project upon it, which then increases the amount of masking that is needed, thereby increasing the negative space to be projected upon. Mm-hmm. So it's just some science that I'm doing these days.
Pretty badass shit.
And now,
the shift ratio.
The shift ratio. There's lots of shift science. That should be
I'm looking forward to hearing about this.
Oh my goodness! I'm gonna replace spirit science.
Yep.
Be the new,
Yeah. There needs to be some serious tweaking happening.
I'm really, I can't get my fingers out of it. Like,
it's a matter of survival. It's not a hobby. It's a survival adaptation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't want to be this way. This isn't who I want to be as a person. I mean, I like it now, but this was not the goal initially. To be so meddlesome with the way people think in general. Like, just, how much can I toy with about what I've been taught, and see how much I can play with that with others.
But when we're responsible, when we see it all, and we become responsible, people for what's going on. When you take a look at everything, in that mass scale and have to be responsible for it. We get tagged into places that we never thought we would or didn't ever want to go.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to be the way, integrous beings on this planet get tagged in, and we have to do something.
Well, you use the word responsibility that inherently implies ability to respond.
That's
so when you take it from that perspective, how does that affect what you're saying?
I think there's layers to that. And so, when you take it from that angle, most of us have an ability to respond in some sense. Mm-hmm. And then some of us take it to that level of, if we don't do this, if we don't do something, and maybe we don't know what it is we're going to do, but we're just going to try, we're going to start somewhere, that we're going to be held responsible for it, in that complacency space. And so I think that's where I'm going with that, taking a look at the state of our planet, our world, that we've helped construct, or we're helping deconstruct, or we were handed and we didn't ask for it. That when we see those damaged spaces, and we feel, that suffering does not need to be there, that we're jumping in. We feel that weight, that pressure to do something. And so that's what I'm talking about with that responsibility. And so many people don't do the response part of it. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, and I know we're just talking about, the blocks, like the blocks to being visible. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of those areas that keep us from doing something, keep us from moving, keep us stagnant and frozen. But then there's some of us who can really step up and do a lot more, and we are able to respond. And the ones who have, I think, the more privilege to respond, have that bigger weight on their shoulders, bigger burden to respond.
Perhaps. Mm-hmm. Can I ask a question about that? Or when I say that, I just want to be clear what I'm responding to, which is a very large structure that you just brought about and put in front of us. So I'm not addressing the entirety of it because I can't, right? Mm-hmm. But in the structure that you're speaking of, and in the context to responsibility, and looking at that in terms of a person's ability to respond to a thing, what does it mean to you? And this is in context simultaneously to all the external factors that you brought up, right? What does it mean to be held in responsibility?
So the direction I'm coming from, and like we've talked about before, it's always from that Tlingit, the Tlingit space, that indigenous space, the tribe that I belong to. Mm-hmm. So the concepts are always, even though I'm putting them into English and maybe they don't translate as well, the concepts are always Tlingit. Mm-hmm. And what our communities, when we were healthy, when we had access to that health and we were living sustainably, what we would do is we were always looking out for another person, always looking out for the other person. Mm-hmm. We were picking up their battles for them, and in turn, they're picking up our battles for us. So that way, everybody gets held in this space, and everybody's represented, and everybody's offered this safety and this support system. So that's how I view it, is if we just picked up the battle for somebody else, nobody gets left behind.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. So is that, I'm drawing a dotted line in my mind, and I want to confirm whether this is a thing or not. Rhetorically, culturally, do you still hold that energy in like a present sense? Does that make sense?
Yes. I personally do. This is how I was raised. This is what the elders taught. This is directly from our ancestral lineage. Mm-hmm. These things have not changed. They didn't change for what we know of as 10,000 years. That we have carbon dated access to this land here. And so that's how I hold space, is and why I can gather and garner so much of the suffering is because always looking outward for other people, you're not going to miss what they're going through.
So that's a primary, immediate, conscious consideration, like a compass. That's like within all of the complexity of the environment to which that process of consideration exists. That's the center.
Yes.
So
yes, our whole structure is founded on that. We have opposites, and we're the balance to that opposite. So our clans are structured where we have an opposite, and our job is to take care of our opposites. We hold them up in high regard. Their job is to do the same. So you have this constant looping of reaching for other people. And that's what was valued. You know, that's what was valued as wealth, is how much you're putting into that. Not how much you're extracting from it. How much you're getting, how much you're adding to that.
Look how much,
that's where the value.
Right. Look how much I'm generating by my very participation, not by an abstract symbol of that process.
Right.
Outside of it. It's the process itself.
I'm still kind of moved in like, I'm like, part of me, like I'm suspended in time. I'm like looping on that. You started it, speaking from like when we had the means to be healthy, this is how we were. And that present vibe still carrying on, there's something in me that I didn't even know. It looked like a shadow or like a negative space or like just like a pocket of air to me, but you just named something.
Cool.
Like a why I do things, why I think a certain way, what it is that I'm so confident about, where my faith comes in or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I firmly believe, we have those DNA connections. We have those DNA, we have that DNA coding back to different times where things might have been healthier, where the community was important. People, individuals were important. And it was important to create that community. We call it a village, Kwan. But it was important to have the health of that community. And that's how we were gauging, our success. And I think a lot of us have that. We may not feel it so much, but a lot of us have that DNA coding that when we respond to it, we remember these things that were healthy, that did support in a different way than what we're seeing now in these times.
I agree. From my perspective, which is a very different place, but that feels like truth to me.
It's gorgeous. It's shiny. Yeah.
So what do we do with that?
I activate the hell out of it as much as I can.
What's that look like?
For me, it's tracking myself first, right? So it's doing that internal work. It's finding the spaces that resonate with what I view as truth, that seem to resonate with the universal truths, right? These things were already here. They existed. Coming from the space where I'm coming from in Tlingit, we migrated here. We weren't just here. We migrated here, and we were chosen. We were chosen by the energetic system that was already here, Tlingit, and it taught us. So these are old codes of conduct. Just like if you want to talk about, the Bible before it's been misinterpreted and translated and changed and all of those kinds of things. These old codes were here. There's a lot of good pathways that I find. And the more I clear myself of that human condition that seems to get in the way of everything, the more I hear it, the more it lights up, the more I can see it, the more I can feel it. And it's just there. It's there to access.
Yeah.
Word.
Okay. Wait. So we just did like a circle into we started in the future. We started with the who we are's. Let's do the where we came from. So generally in the episodes that I've had guests in, there's like no introductions at all. But if you want to take some time to introduce yourself.
And that's I just want to point out that the hilarity in a good way, and the equation that was just laid out was the the benefit, the feedback loop, the beneficial feedback loop of considering others and letting go of the self, followed by the invitation to define yourself, introduce yourself.
If you want to, because I'm cool with.
I'm just saying that's just what happened, and I like watching patterns, and that's funny. And I think that's cool, and I want to see what's going to happen.
And I love the way you deconstruct moments like a game, like a playbook. Like you like, it's very neat. It took me a while to get used to, and then once I clicked on what you were doing, I was just like, okay, that's like more of that all the time.
I feel like I'm just pointing out the human behavior right in front of me.
Right. It's very useful, for tracking that. How are we going with this? What are we putting out there? What are we adding to, and what are we taking from? And it does follow all of that and follows those patterns. That's
the next step in the reaction to the introduction of the ideas and feelings that you just communicated. Well, Schiff's reaction was, well, what's yourself?
Well, here's the thing. Mm-hmm. You are a voice of wisdom. And if that's the identity you want to hold in this space, we can just continue talking. If you want to contextualize for the peoples that are listening anymore.
Sure. I want to, so who are you? That's all. I want to see what's going to happen next. I want to stop talking about me. I want to see what's going to happen.
Get into that. Who are you?
Yeah.
Huh?
and there's a question I have around that. Where do you start and I end?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Narrative.
Well, I know for myself personally, and so just to give a little background, my colonized name is Yolanda, right? I have a Tlingit name, so I grew up here in Alaska, and so don't want to say the programming, but the teaching, the learning, but we all get programmed, right? We all get programmed by our environment, by what's going on. I grew up in Alaska, so what I spent my time on, or what chose me, and I should say that it chose me because I was sought out by elders, was Tlingit. So it's, this indigenous way of thinking. And so that's, what has helped to construct me. And it's something that I hang on to. Because I find it's a really, pristine, valuable system in the ways of supporting and helping each other and staying in a healthy space. When we talk about ego and these things are getting in our way, I found it's a really great way. Once I uncovered, hey, there is this ego and there's many facets to it, and a lot of it is damaging. And it's very harmful out there that, Tlingit keeps us out of that ego because we're always looking out there to support. And in turn, we're getting supported. So I hung on to that. I've rejected all kinds of different beliefs, growing up religious, growing up as a woman, growing up under patriarchy and colonialism, and I've rejected all those things. They just did not fit with what I was taught. So where do I end and where do you begin? And I don't know if there's really that space so much because we're all connected, right? I feel we're connected. It doesn't mean there's not disconnect from what I found. What I look at, there's disconnect, and for the most part, it's the bullshit, that's being done where there has to be this disconnect because I can't take that on. I can't go there, but
connection and disconnection, I don't think they're binary states. I was just thinking I disconnect from like myself in different ways. Like my leg falls asleep when I sit wrong. I could get psychological about it, but I could also get really basic and be like, yeah, like the blood flow can get disconnected. I mean, I'm disconnected to most of my subconscious process and my physiological process most of the time. I don't know what's going on I don't know what's going on in my calf muscle all the time. I was thinking last night about I used to have real there was this window where I had solid control over my heart rate. I could bump it up and pull it down on my own and do this whole thing that I don't have access to anymore, and just kind of how that operated. I guess that's kind of flashing in my mind on the notion of connection and disconnection. Like, I guess it's like, to me, I'm seeing what you're saying, but I'm feeling like it's like I'm just seeing the whole body of us, I guess, as
right.
With that, when you say disconnection and connection, I thought of my leg falling asleep, thought of someone that I don't understand at the same time.
Right. And I mean, I think it's also possible, like going to those really immediate, relatable kind of references to disconnect. Like, I think there's many places where we might simultaneously be disconnected and connected, like literally simultaneously around the same thing at the same time. For instance, I could have a relationship with somebody that I'm very connected to because I have to share space with them, but I could feel very disconnected to them emotionally.
Right.
But I could feel like a strong physiological reaction to either one of us having to change in the environment based on our connection to the environment and our relationship to it. Like, if all of a sudden they got sick and couldn't do something, it affects me in a way that's intense enough where the place that I'm disconnected may or may not affect that.
I got one too. Is right now we're audibly connected but visually disconnected.
True that.
Affecting my mind in some way, and then we're audibly connected to our audience, and we're connected to each other in current time, but connected to them through like a distancing of some kind that we would all describe probably very different ways at different times, possibly for some people. It's
true.
Yeah, I think maybe the thing to kind of maybe circle in on is that the notions of connection and disconnection, people do really see them as binaries a lot, and it informs their kind of like approach moving forward, I guess, you know?
The choices we make based on the structures we base those choices on.
Yeah.
And they're still all connected, right? Simultaneously.
Yeah.
Even these structures are still connected. They're still impacting. You know, they're still intersecting. So there's always that movement that's happening, right? Always that exchange of energy, whether we like it or not. And that's that whole picture of connection. And then within there's, you know, it's multifaceted, right?
Very, very, very. So,
you know, people are connected to this land. They have to be. What are we walking on? But they're so disconnected from the awareness of this land and what it's requiring, what it's asking. They can't even hear it, you know, anymore.
Right. And I think that's related to the binary approach to things, because if you're basing, it's like binary realism, right? The idea that everything can be broken down to a binary. What that looks like, that inherently has to, like, it looks for a beginning and an end as its core structure for defining all things. So it can't take into consideration an infinite loop. Like it can't. It's like trying to detect heat with a microphone. You know, I guess it's technically possible, like if you're recording a fire, but like microphones detect a certain type of transmission of physics, whereas heat can make air move, but heat isn't what microphones pick up. If that makes sense.
Right.
Like a binary perspective isn't capable of accounting for an infinite loop that actually structurally doesn't have a beginning or an end.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you think that's social programming that's causing that?
I think that it's really easy to make decisions when you don't have to consider an infinite loop. And when our brains are inherently evolved to save energy with maximum outcome, our brains are going to believe whatever they need to believe to make decisions fast if they feel like survival's on the line. And so that benefit of the ability to discount information to make decisions is directly related to structures of power around who's allowed to make decisions and the resources that are available to them to support their process, which is privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's multifaceted. It's like, if you really look deep into a human being, you'll see facets of privilege and oppression, like in complicated ways that can't be accounted for currently in our conversation because we just don't have the language or the tools yet, or the incentive, to be honest. And
well,
go ahead.
I think we're developing the language and the tools, and
Absolutely.
I have the incentive. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm getting real ambitious about it myself.
I'm speaking in the environment to which I feel like I'm adapting. Like, I have to do this, so I don't want to die. Like, for me, it's like, if I don't do this, I don't want to live. I don't want to be alive anymore. I can't stand it. I'm done. Fuck this shit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only option I have found other than that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was doing the same thing, and then you showed up and let me know that I was really not alone. And this whole podcast wouldn't even be what it is without that drive.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we're already making it.
And I think there may be more of us than we realize. Like, we might be so not alone that the opposite of our feeling of loneliness, which could, I would wager, be pretty impactful for some people. Like, in our lifetimes, we might actually to be able to experience the other side of that. Like, a feeling of connection so great. Like people might not even know how safe they can feel because certain groups of muscles in their bodies directed to their neurology, which is directly related to the violence in the environment, has never let those muscle groups relax ever. From maybe 3 years old or some shit.
Younger.
And they're 50 years old and they don't know that when certain muscles around your stomach and heart relax, it affects your whole body. And they're micro muscles that are based on reactions to stress. And so when you're trying to communicate to somebody that they don't know how much pleasure they can actually feel because of the ambient suffering, it's a difficult conversation.
In healthcare, misinformation can be as confounding as a labyrinthian rabbit hole and grow as quickly. For decades, myths about psychedelics have spread on the internet and social media. The deadheads, radical queers, and woke-ass therapists of the Jefferson State Psychonautic Society want you to know the facts, man. Psychedelics are scientifically proven to make shit suck less, and failure to consider using them can raise your chances of falling apart in 2020 and 2021, 2022, and 2023. Because that's all we fucking get. More 2020. Talk to a tree and get the facts about psychedelics today. Side effects may include things sucking more.
One thing I definitely want to make sure that we cover is sort of like where we've come from. Because the three of us have come from different but similar exoduses to... Is that the plural of Exodus? Never mind.
Exodi?
Maybe it's just Exodus. It's like goose. Wait, no, moose. Wait.
I think, if I remember, I believe the technical word is Exodus.
So I was in non-denominational, evangelical, all kinds of weird, wonky, we just make up our own bizarre doctrines and make it Puritan. One particular cult when I was a teenager that was run by a very bizarre man that got a lot of control over a lot of families for a long time. So, my whole perspective is really informed by just kind of like absurdism in religion, I suppose, like absolute cartoonish notions of delusion being put together as prophetic guidance that people took seriously. And I got to watch those things shatter in front of me, like in real time, in person, when I was a teenager.
That's heavily impactful, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Eugene.
My turn? I'm still trying to figure out where the hell I came from. But my narrative, like my story, is pretty... I grew up in Santa Barbara, which is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. Beautiful beaches, beautiful trees, beautiful mountains and hills, and just plastic people. Like the amount of disconnect that I felt growing up there was pretty intense, but I had a really different reality. And I feel like there's all these booby traps around sharing my narrative in an environment where vulnerability and trust are rarities, which is not what I feel in this conversation with you two. It's just what I feel being alive in this planet with all these people around me.
Absolutely.
And so I have a trepidation to define my upbringing as like special or unique. And I hate that. I hate that anybody would imply that, actually, because it makes me feel more disconnected. And I'm hoping that there's more people out there that have similar experiences so I can at least feel less alone. But I grew up with Jehovah's Witnesses, and not with Jehovah's Witnesses, the product of Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's a very unique religious niche, because I'm going to make a lot of claims in trying to reference what it was like for me to grow up in that religion. Is that while I think I see patterns in my environment in other aspects of Christianity and post-Christian extrapolations of Christianity that are still based on the same structures, while I would see plenty of places where people are willing to like just deeply traumatize their own children for their own religious agendas, Jehovah's Witnesses are kind of unique, because other than, I think, Christian Scientists, they're the only Christian religion that I know of that part of their overt dogma it's not hidden in text. It's like they write their own books about this shit, and it's in the books. And it's in the conversations with the children between parents, which is that if you need certain medical treatments that may save your life, we're going to let you die, because the treatments themselves are bad. So because that treatment is bad, you're worth letting die. So growing up with that is pretty intense, and it makes me have to really understand the capacity for people that don't understand certain, what they would define as alarmist perspectives around violence in the environment. Because from my perspective, like, my violence was like, see that pit, son? We'll throw you in there if we have to. It's God, man. Because he's told us to, and it's really important.
No, and I think, what we're all talking about, and I grew up with a religious background too. My parents, when I was young, decided to try to balance, the damage that had happened in their own families. And on one side, we've got poor Native people, and on the other side, we've got, poor white trash people. And to try to fix that damage, they turned to religion. And so we grew up in Mormonism. And I think, there were good things about religion. I don't want to discredit religion as people follow certain things to betterment, or, what their intention is. However, the impact, from a religious standpoint, I think the impact outweighs some of the good. The harmful impact outweighs some of this good that people are reaching for. And then also having that indigenous background and having the understanding and awareness that religion had done most of the damage.
Right.
To our people. This was all based on religion. Even the forced assimilation was funneled through boarding schools. That was religious. The viewpoint of us being savages, and we're uncivil. That's all based on this religious structure of colonialism. And so I had those, I was at odds with these things, because I could feel truth in some things, sitting in church or reading books, and trying to be that good person that they want you to be, because I always want to be a good person. And I know that's subjective, but I'm always looking to better things around me. That's just one of those critical fundamentals in Tlingit, is leaving things better than what you found them, leaving a person in a better state than what you found them, leaving the land better. Everything we can do, can we do it better, for the the health and the morale and the support of everything. Because in our belief system, we're like we talked about connection. We're all connected. We are the environment. Mm-hmm. We are a part of the environment. We are not separate from it. And so, trying to work through all of these things, because there was so much internal conflict, mm-hmm. and everything that I was interested in was always considered evil. Mm-hmm. Everything, listening to, that the preaching that was happening, all of the teachings that, we were put through. Yeah. And I'd have so many questions. I was that little kid that they just hated.
Right.
My teachers hated me because.
Why are you making me do hard work?
Now, I'm like, this is not logical.
Now go do hard work for benefit.
Right.
That's what I think is important.
What type of questions, what type of things did you have?
Well, it was always centered around hypocrisy. It was either logic or hypocrisy. I'm like, this is not logical. And I'm trying to remember, somebody I think I was 8 and I can't remember what the subject was, but I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Hey, that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. That's not logical. Mm-hmm. And at 8 years old, they don't want to deal with an 8-year-old that's, using logic and trying to figure this out. And that's just the way it is. And I'm like, but no, I don't think so. Cause over here, this is something different, and then later on I would go and challenge their personal beliefs that they brought in as, this is part of the religion. I'm like, well, wait, the last bishop didn't do that. Why are you doing this? And they would plead their case, and I'd say, but hey, that's, that's your personal individual belief. Mm-hmm. Why are you putting this on everybody else? This is not one of those rules. I'll bring out the little handbook, and I'm 12 years old, and they're saying, you I love that. You just have to support me. That's just the way it is. They got very, So
the negative space there is their logic that they're not communicating.
Yes.
That's the negative space.
Yes. And even when they did communicate it, I didn't understand it because it did not fit in my logicals at all, because I could point out the hypocrisy of it. I'm like, that's hypocritical.
Wait, I think I've got a nerve hitting another nerve in my brain. Hold on.
We're nerving out.
So is it totally, just like slap me if I'm saying something just outrageous. This might be just like sacrilege right now. Is it wild to say that like hypocritical religious authoritarians are masking, and they are leaving negative space to project upon, and so we're all confused.
That's the whole point. Is like masking isn't just this binary conversation that is applicable to people who are autistic or have any kind of experience that's not immediately easily accessible. That's social to that person's neurology to the degree that it gets diagnosed as a thing, right?
We use the term normcore here, and we say it with our chests. Yes.
Well, I say it with a roll of my eyes, but
I mean, that's true or whatever. But
because I'm tired of it. I've just had it shoved down my throat so much. Like it's But you're right. Yes, it is normcore. It's like that hardcore heavy metal normalcy, like. And I call it heavy metal because, like, it's the demand for masking that, for me, is like constantly having to deal with everybody around me blasting heavy metal music all the time. Like, that's what it feels like. Like, I have to listen to this loud ass music, and I actually don't even dislike a lot of the aspects of it. I just don't want to hear it blasted at me all the time. That's what the request for acquiescence to presentation in this very specific mask, this very specific expression of what safe and accessible is supposed to look like, is exhausting and loud. Just like having to listen to someone's loud ass heavy metal all fucking day and night.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you both, just for clarification, so I make sure we have the same, definition, because I'm finding this, even if we're using the same language, there's language barrier.
Love it.
Because we're all coming with different concepts and different definitions. And I find this is massive conflict. This creates a lot of conflict when people are using the same word and it's a totally different term, internally. Yes. So masking.
Oh, I thought we were going to talk about heavy metal and the roots of it.
Oh,
my bad. Go ahead, masking.
I've tried on heavy metal a long time ago when I was very aggressive and, pissed off at the world. And it was a place to funnel that rage. So, it was very useful. I think it saved me in a lot of ways. So I didn't rage against other people and cause more harm to myself because of it. But, at this point, I'm like you, Eugene, I don't want to hear it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't want to always go there. Some days I'll crank it up because I'm like, I'm feeling aggressive. I've got that. I need to funnel this, and it's a great way instead of warring. And, we can't, there's a lot of things we can't do that sometimes we feel like we want to do. But it's a great funnel for my energy.
I had time for both last week. Warring and listening to a little metal it was a couple of days. Gosh. So masking. We're gonna define masking. Can I ask first? Let me answer your question with a question. What do you think it means?
Yeah, sure. So in my mind, when I hear that, and I'm not so savvy with all of these terminologies that are out there, I'm learning these things. There's this language in, social justice and unpacking privilege and dismantling systems, that I'm learning. I feel it. I understand it. I know it. It's that empathy, and Eugene and I were talking about empathy, but I feel it. I know when I'm triggered by it, but I don't always have the language. So in my mind, with the masking, what I see is an ego mask in most people, where they're, and I can usually drill it down to insecurities.
Yep.
The fear, and it's usually attached to insecurities. And there's this layering effect of, what they think they have to do or how they have to believe or what they have to present to make themselves feel safe, instead of just honing in on, hey, this is the problem. But there's all of these layers, and it can get so out of control that, that workability isn't there, to transcend that.
Right.
And it's very difficult for me to get past, that masking. That's how I see it, but I'm not sure how you're speaking about it. So I want to be clear that
point you made about insecurity, though, I just want to put a little footnote right here, is really, really critical, in my opinion, from my perspective, to extrapolated conversations of antidote to what we're talking about. But I don't want to distract from what we're talking about with masking, because that's we're still talking about that. But where you just talked about insecurity, that's really important, because part of the pressure of masking is the authoritarian demand for that we have. And I would put forth that the trigger for authoritarianism is insecurity.
I also want to assert in this context, I feel personally it's very important, in my own narrative at least, to define insecurity as not a feeling of being insecure about my identity or insecure
not
about how I'm, but literal, it's not secure for me to, it's unstable if I come fully authentic.
That's perfect. That's actually the really good way to put it. It's instability.
And it's not a sureness. It's a question of whether or not the whole environment is going to crumble upon me in shards if I'm too heavy for it or something.
Right.
Is it really what it looks like, or is it made of paper?
Imagine it's a cheesy metaphor, but because it's just so obvious, but a straight person who's homophobic, who feels super fucking powerful and confident, and then something happens in their environment which not only makes them question their identity around that and what that means, but also it happens in a place where others are witnessing that without their immediate consent, because nobody knew it was going to, you know what I mean? That insecurity brings about that like rage or reactionary, any kind of thing, right? That's where the homophobia kind of ramps up because of the insecurity.
Right. And then like jesting usually comes in as that's generally the bail from that vibe. Right, like people,
right. I mean,
there's like flashcards that I can write out.
The straights have their built-in. The straights have their built-in parachute cords for their own insecurities, for sure, because they have control of the means of production of the conversation. They can make all the parachutes and all of the clips to clip onto to help each other hoist each other out of growth.
I feel like I want to kind of point out though, like in the air of compassion, I personally feel in my analysis of that little that articulation of I don't know, social interaction, I suppose, like it's a type of thing. It seems to me to be more like it's vulnerable reactivity more than like a hammer coming down out of like a power move. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't. Right. It's like there's a certain level of me that's very, very clear when I see entitlement act out that it's coming from a place of profound anxiety. Like insecurity that the situation's going to crumble upon itself on that.
So do you think that reaction, that strong reaction is because they're hitting that vulnerable place?
Yes.
And maybe that's, unawareness. It's challenging a belief, internally that they don't want to let go of. And so when something hits that vulnerable place, they don't want to go into vulnerability to freedom from all of these things that, they have to hold on to. And that's what's causing that entitlement reaction. You see that big reaction from them, or they're pulling the parachute line, like you're saying, Eugene.
And there's a key component within that too. And you touched upon the compassionate approach shift, and which is that, like Yolanda, when you hit that, when that place gets hit, like the fact that you chose the word hit is pretty apropos, because the reinforcement to those things always come down to physical, like threat of physical violence.
Right.
And in some fashion, even if it's disconnected by, several degrees of individuals, if the social patterns are flowing through the individuals, all it takes is one person to lash out violently from that place. Then the person who's having to adapt to that, their capacity to be aware of their environment is going to seek out where that pattern may emerge or not to hurt them, and how to mask themselves to avoid that. To avoid any aspect of the spectrum that infers the most extreme results of the insecurity, which is physical danger or even death, which is why when like reactionaries try to checkmate people who experience violence, they'll be like, well, first of all, they'll be like, you haven't, they'll create arguments such as like, well, you haven't been murdered, so you're, clearly you're wrong. And then you kind of got to coax them. Well, yeah, that's true. And this is XYZ has happened. It's like, well, everybody goes through violence. I got beat up. Da 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 da. It doesn't mean because of this. It doesn't mean these larger patterns of violence exist, even though they're kind of pointing out that they were treated violently as well. But then, and then
I think we've all experienced this out there, right? The same darn conversation.
Right? Like, police aren't bad. They kill shit tons of white people, too.
It's super weird.
Oh, you're right. I hadn't considered all the other
that
people
negates everything, right?
Carry on.
It's super wild to watch people gaslight themselves, trying to gaslight you, but not realizing that they're touching a lamp, and they're just burning themselves when they're doing it too. Like, you don't even have to try.
Which is why compassion's so important, because it puts you in a power position with them.
Okay, so wait, then let's get back to what, really, I'm like, okay, so where I'm at is that there's this loud vibe that I feel comes personally from like liberals and progressives that don't have any skin in the game. There's an us versus them thing with like bigots and the people that bigots want to fuck up. right?
Right.
And I am one of those things that bigots want to fuck up. And what I'm saying is I feel that progressives and liberals may be creating a big amount of interference that's inhibiting communication.
They're not just doing
down a lot of that murdering.
No, they are doing exactly what their political position is intended to do, which is to rebrand the inherent violence in the system. And
do you think they're aware of that? Because I have this fight all the time.
I would wager they're aware of it on some level that's so deep down that it manifests in deep struggles that are like deeply impactful in any number of directions because people are so diverse. In that by the time they hit the day-to-day impact of just going to work and toiling and laboring and then returning to rest and doing that again and again and again and again and again and again, that by the time it gets enough for that reality to be like, do they know that? It's completely unrecognizable as being that. And when you're masking and you haven't detached, when you had no incentive to detach from the mask that you're forced to wear.
Right. With that privileged safety place. Yeah.
Whatever that may be. I mean, like, think about like someone who struggles with narcissism, right? Like that's like a place where someone is completely unable to take into consideration another person. And if you don't want to be religious, which I'm not suggesting one should or should not be, but if you want to be logical, like all experience comes from our bodies. Like there are negative spaces that are more than just our bodies that we're even talking about right now, but like our brains are processing all of it. So it emerges from our bodies. There's unless you can quantify it in a way that can help a narcissist or someone who experiences narcissism experience what it's like to feel the thing that they're not able to feel, which could very well be ableism, because it might be demanding that someone who is in a wheelchair walk.
Well, right? I think there's a gradient to it, certainly, since
where do you speak of
here's
ableism. The thing. Where do you get to say that about someone who can't feel, right, without becoming an authoritarian?
What came to me was that it's not about like convincing them to have empathy, if you will. It's about
that's not what I was suggesting.
So okay.
I'm talking about what if someone is completely incapable, like the ideas that you spoke about earlier, Yolanda, and the relationship of, using the compass of where needs to be met and using that to navigate, and the feedback loop of that prioritization, which leads to an abundance of your needs getting met. Like when you speak on that, that doesn't exist on an intellectual level alone by any means whatsoever. It involves bodies, which involve emotions, which involve beliefs, which involve ideas, and then all kind of other weird shits the brains do, which does a lot of weird shit. And so within that spectrum of just massive human expression, you got this person who can't physically process anybody else's experience. And maybe they really want to, and they literally can't. Like mathematically, aspects of their biology are damaged. Maybe it's a brain injury. Maybe they used to be able to feel people and now they can't. How do we navigate that?
My answer hasn't changed.
Without becoming and this is what the Democrats do, is they fetishize that, and then they become authoritarian through kindness because they have to maintain the state, which is an authoritarian structure. And so they have to say, for the person who can't feel what other people feel, well, we're going to tell you what you should. We're going to create the environment which ultimately is in their best interests. It's where at the end of the day, just because the person who can't feel other people doesn't mean they're not feeling themselves. They're not feeling distress and not having agency and choice and autonomy, right? But that's just not even talking about capitalism, which incentivizes narcissism, which is the whole other pressure. But that right there is a thing, because if we're talking about compassion, ubiquitous compassion demands we approach compassionless people with compassion and knowing that they're not just going to all of a sudden magically be like, oh, I get it, right on, let's do this. Like, that's not a luxury we can afford.
So I have different kits in my work for different applications, and like I wouldn't bust out a kit for
right on.
Yeah, just the appropriate kit has to come at the appropriate time. And so my answer hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. It's not about evoking something that's not got capacity to be in that space. It's about applying what is possible to build the bridge where it is. Like, I'm not going to build a scaffold in a way that's not appropriate for what I'm trying to do the work around, right? Like, I don't need to build it higher than the thing it is or away from it in some distance. That's not going to be helpful. And so I'm going to meet it where it's at. And that means my answer is that I'm going to, where I have capacity, because it's just what I know about myself personally, and I assume there are other people in the world like this, I'm going to generate the love needed to see what I need to see to build the kit I need to build to do the work that's needed there. And that isn't defined as getting them to move in any direction.
So, but
that's if I have the resources, if I have the motivation.
But what if moving them is what you need to be seen for all the things you've been speaking about, like in all your past podcasts and all the other things?
Why would that be a definitive obstacle, I suppose?
I'm not quantifying it as a definitive obstacle. I'm more of just a tactical consideration, right? So in the spaces where you're being suffocated, you're being demanded to mask, how do you not, like, you're being pushed upon, right? Like, that's what privilege does for people who aren't able to feel how it affects those who don't have privilege in certain areas. So they're crushing your experience. You have this experience of being pushed out, unseen, taking up space, etc., but you don't want to move them?
So a couple of things. One, it's not a continuous sealed bubble of pressure, if you will. It changes states at different times depending on the zeitgeists, the micro and macro cosmic zeitgeists.
Very, very true.
Additionally, so given that, even if I'm like completely unable to move, they have me penned in and I'm completely suffocated, getting smaller and smaller and crushing down to nothing. Eventually the state of the environment's going to change, and I'm evolving all the time. So I'm going to get wings. I'm going to burrow. There's going to be some way to move from where I'm at. It's not that big of a deal if I can't be seen at all right now. Like, that's not something I knew in my gut until like this year. Like, I really got 2020 vision in 2020. I don't know. The other thing with it is that it's like, if I stop worrying about what's happening outside of me and I get real internal with it and start doing work there, I'm able to do this thing where I can concentrate my energy and alchemize it into being nuclear, and I can blast shit that seemed immovable. Like, it seems like something I shouldn't even try for a long time, and then I'll do it out of necessity. It's a survival thing. It's a phoenixing thing where I'm like being crushed and it just makes sense to like burn up on my own, like just fine, like fuck it all, be a new thing, and have a new approach, be a new thing, do something else, do something else. And then from there, I just start getting really clever. I go into like an artist mode in my spiritual war, like strategy room or whatever, my situation room or whatever, with the crew in my mind, like all of me and my demons doing our shit. Figuring out how we're going to fucking move. And sometimes they be having meetings without me and do some shit. And I'm like, well, how are we going to damage control that now? that was the right move, but my goodness, guys, like that's y'all. Like,
they'll just make you catch up. That's just how it goes. They're not working in 3D, and now you got to deal with it in 3D.
Right. And then I've been doing enough, like, you know, loving on them and training on them that like they really are kind of good at doing, even when I'm like in states that I, you know, generally I'm like, you know, you shouldn't be communicating with people while you're like this.
Stop that. You see it coming out of your mouth or your fingertips on keyboard. Yeah.
It just happens. And it's, you know, I feel like we're working in congruence towards getting, you know, just just getting the poison out of shit. Just, there's all these infections, these bumps, there's boils popping up and they need to be lanced. We're just gonna do it. So yeah, no, and I'm just gonna, you know, I'm gonna redirect myself if I need to, you know, like I don't need to combat that which cannot be combated. Cause again, you know, you were talking earlier about our brains are trying to conserve energy while getting maximum output at all times. And like, I, for a long time was burning gas that came out. Like I was just like spinning my wheels and the exhaust manifested as like a smoke inside of me. And that was depression. Like it was just this like thing that it was just building up. I had no idea. All I had to do was just write myself onto the situation. Like just be authentic. And to some degree, there's always going to be an amount of masking that's authentic to me, because some of them are comfortable and some of them are uncomfortable, but they're safe. And I just know that they're comfortable in a different way. They're familiar if they're uncomfortable.
Is it safe to say that when you feel like you're being forced to mask, that you adapt with the abilities you have at hand?
Yeah.
Word.
Yeah, and the kits change. Sometimes I just don't have access to resources, and
so it's really, at the end of the day, beyond when we take a more universal perspective, it's about ability.
All the time.
So that's where this whole compassion vibe is fascinating for me, and why I was specifically bringing up.
Was that cutting out?
Eugene, your signal was cutting out the whole time you were talking just now for like 15 seconds.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
Yeah. You're fine now. And then your timeline was flashing too. Your sound, the whole thing was like flashing, kind of stroby. But it's good. It's good now. I can hear you and it looks clear.
Are you still there, Yolanda?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, cool.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We're all still here. Okay. So I guess what I was saying is, though, this is where, you know, if we're talking about compassion being a key component to this, all these pressures that we've even just begun to talk about, how do we have compassion is directly creating violence?
Oh,
and
it's happening again.
I don't know. Maybe I just need to be quiet and listen.
Maybe. Well, goodness. I was like trying to get to what you were saying, but we could see it as a signal to. I mean, we're pushing on time right now. Actually,
right.
That's a thing. That's a thing. And we have gotten to a pretty solid place, considering the absolutely like continuously moving dynamic parts of what we're touching upon as a topic here. Goodness. Yeah, this was great. This was a good talk. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I don't know. Anybody got any like good news or something you want to plug or share or like anything?
Spiffy slogan.
You got a spiffy slogan?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if we can hear it. It was a little choppy.
We're waiting for it.
Yeah.
We're hanging on here, Eugene.
The only difference between fighting and dancing is an idea. It's the same muscles. It's the same physics. It's the same. Yes. It's the same considerations of impact and force and submission and dominance in spiraled play, right? Or spiraled conflict. It's just an idea. We're always fighting, and we're just one idea away from always fucking dancing.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
So who wants us to stop dancing? That's my question.
Well, I think that can take us down a whole rabbit hole of all kinds of...
Oh, goodness. Are we going to have another episode sometime? Yeah. Will you come back?
Of course.
Wonderful. Yay.
No, this has been good conversation.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you both. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank our patrons on Patreon and everyone who's bought our merchandise on TeePublic. Find the links to all that stuff and our social links on goodmorningmayberry.com. We've got closed captioned episodes on YouTube. Subscribe, listen, and rate us on all the podcast spots. If you're wondering who we are, we is me and my demons. And you can join the Legion by following our Tumblr, Twitter, or Instagram, jumping on the Patreon, or just buying one of our shirts and wearing that around, drinking the tears of whoever you like the least out of one of our mugs. And coming back and checking out the next episode. I'm Shift. And always remember to never forget.
The only difference between fighting and dancing is an idea. It's the same muscles. It's the same physics. It's the same considerations of impact and force and submission and dominance in spiraled play, right? Or spiraled conflict. It's just an idea. We're always fighting, and we're just one idea away from always fucking dancing.
The Jefferson State Psychonautic Society is a fictitious organization, and the entire PSA inserted in the center of this episode was a spoof. I don't want anybody to get the idea that I need to get some kind of cease and desist order from some kind of bizarre, mountain cluster of libertarian business fucks from Honeydew, California or some shit, you know? Like, I don't need any trouble from y'all. And so if you had this idea of your little psychedelic society, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to start any waves with anybody who may be using that name. I did Google it, but I feel like the type of organization that would be like, we're Jefferson State Psychonautic Society. They're going to be probably a little off grid potentially, and may or may not access the internet to consume content, regardless of whether or not they feel compelled to project themselves onto the internet. Anyway, bye.